Welcome everyone to the stream. I found this wonderful field that I was just walking by and I thought this is a really nice place to do a live stream today. We're going to be learning about several topics today and they kind of all come back to the same form, 느니. There's something else I want to talk about first, and that is an adverb, 차라리. What 차라리 means is rather or preferably. Most of the time you're not going to translate this as anything in English, but this is what it literally means. So let's do an example sentence with this before we go on to our form. So first we just have this sentence, doesn't use 차라리. 더운 것보다 추운 게 나아요. Nat다 means to be preferable. So it is preferable to be cold more than hot. I'd rather be cold than hot. Literally though, being cold is preferable to being hot. 더운 것보다 추운 게 나아요. I think it's better to be cold, more preferable to be cold than to be hot. Now let's take our adverb that we have. 더운 것보다 차라리 추운 게 나아요. So we have the same overall meaning here. It's better to be cold, it's preferable to be cold than hot. So now we have more of a meaning in English of like, I'd rather be cold than hot. I'd rather be. Again, like I said, you don't need to translate it as rather or preferably in English, but it does have that sort of additional meaning that it adds. This 차라리, so what it does basically is adds emphasis that there is a better choice. So among two options or among two possibilities, 차라리 is the preferable one. So that's what it means. So here, if you don't have 차라리 in the sentence, it's still fine. 더운 것보다 추운 게 나아요. But now adding 차라리 shows there are two choices here, and I'm going to tell you which is preferable, and that is 추운 게 나아요. So in English, we would use this to say something like, I'd rather be cold, or just, it's much better to be cold, or I'd really prefer being cold to being hot. It just adds more emphasis to the fact that some option is better than another option. 차라리. 잘생긴 얼굴, a handsome face. 잘생긴 얼굴을 그렇게 쓸 거면, literally, if you are going to use a handsome face like that, 차라리, it would be preferable if 저한테 주세요, you just gave it to me. Let's say you're watching BTS, right? So you're watching some footage of them and one of the members is like pulling his face back and like moving his eyes around and making a weird face. You're like, that guy's so handsome. Why is he wasting his face like that, you know? 잘생긴 얼굴을 그렇게 쓸 거면, if you're gonna use that kind of handsome face like that, you should just give it to me. You're just gonna waste your good looks like that. 잘생긴 얼굴을 그렇게 쓸 거면, 차라리, it would be preferable if 저한테 주세요. If you just gave it to me. Rather, just give it to me instead. 잘생긴 얼굴을 그렇게 쓸 거면, if you're gonna just use a handsome face, 그렇게, that way, 차라리, it's preferable if, or rather you should, 저한테 주세요. Just give it to me. Let's do our first grammar form today. So first you take an action verb stem and you attach 느니. Optionally, you can attach to that 차라리. Without it, it still has overall the same meaning. This form means that you are choosing or preferring the second sentence, as in whatever comes after 느니, over the first sentence. That can be because the first sentence is much better. That can be choosing the lesser of two evils. You know, you don't like either choice. You are choosing or just saying that you prefer the second sentence, whatever comes after 느니, over the first sentence. Let's say that A, 느니, is the first part of the sentence and B is the second part of the sentence. So rather than A, B. And B can be whatever you want. B can be I will do something, or please do something, or I'm gonna do something, something like that. Another way you can think of this is I'd rather do B than A, or you should do B instead of A. Adding in 차라리 adds emphasis to that. Like, oh, I would rather do that. Instead of just saying, oh, B is better than A. 차라리 will add more emphasis to it and make it a little bit more clear that you're choosing something. Like, oh, I'd really prefer that. Let's go on to our first sentence. 팝콘을 먹느니. So option A is eating popcorn. Well, now we're gonna say 느니. So we have the second choice is preferable to the first choice. 뻥튀기를 먹겠어. So I'm gonna eat 뻥튀기 instead of popcorn. Or I would rather eat 뻥튀기 than eat popcorn. So you're saying one action, the second action that comes after this form is preferable to the first. 팝콘을 먹느니 뻥튀기를 먹겠어. So I'd rather eat 뻥튀기 than eat popcorn. Now we're not going to use 느니. I don't want you to think that you have to use 느니 to show that something's better than something else. The 느니 form does that, but it's not the only way to say something is preferable to something else. And here's another way you can do it. 이런 식으로 할 거면, literally, if you're going to do it like this, like if you're going to do it so poorly, 차라리 하지를 마. It would be better if you just didn't do it. 이런 식으로 할 거면, if you're going to do things like this, in this way, 차라리, it's preferable to, or you should rather, 하지를 마. Don't do it. It would be preferable that you don't do it if you're going to do it like this. So if you're going to do things like this, you just shouldn't do it. Just don't do it at all. 이런 식으로 할 거면 차라리 하지를 마. 이런 식으로 할 거면 차라리 하지를 마. This is just simply saying, if you're going to do it like that, 할 거면 차라리 하지를 마. So I wanted to show you that you don't have to use 느니 every single time you're saying something is preferable to another thing. Just that 느니 is one way you can do it. Okay, so let's do one more example with 느니. 이런 침대에서 잠을 자느니. So rather than sleep in this kind of bed, 바닥에서 자는 게 더 편해. Sleeping on the ground is more 편하다, comfortable. 바닥에서 자는 게 더 편해. It's more comfortable to sleep on the floor. So 이런 침대에서 잠을 자느니 바닥에서 자는 게 더 편해. So it would be more comfortable to sleep on the floor than to sleep in this kind of bed. Rather than sleep in this bed, it would be more comfortable to sleep on the floor. 이런 침대에서 잠을 자느니 바닥에서 자는 게 더 편해. It would be more comfortable to sleep on the floor than to sleep in this kind of bed. 혼자서 100년을 사느니 사랑하는 사람과 하루를 살겠다. Rather than 사느니, live, 100 years alone, 살겠다. I would live one day with the person I love. So I would rather live one day with someone I love than live 100 years alone. 혼자서 100년을 사느니 사랑하는 사람과 하루를 살겠다. 그 정도로 아프면, if you're that sick, or if you are sick that amount, 차라리 it would be preferable to 결석을 하세요. Skip class, or just don't go to class. 그 정도로 아프면 차라리 결석을 하세요. 주말에 마라톤을 하느니 차라리 등산을 할래요. So I'd rather go hiking than to do a marathon on the weekend. 주말에 마라톤을 하느니 차라리 등산을 할래요. So I'd rather go hiking than run a marathon on the weekend. 스트레스를 받고 사느니. Rather than living with this kind of, like getting this much stress, I would rather 낫겠어요. It would be preferable. 낫겠다 also means to be preferable. Like it would be better. It would be preferred. 하지 않는 게. Not doing. 아무 생각. Any thoughts. 아무 생각도 하지 않는 게 낫겠어요. It would be better to just not think about anything. Rather than 스트레스를 받고 사느니. Rather than living, getting all this stress. 이렇게 스트레스를 받고 사느니. Rather than 이렇게, like this, getting stressed, and while I'm living, 차라리, preferably, 아무 생각도 하지 않는 게 낫겠어요. I'd rather just not think about anything than to get this sort of stress in my life. 이렇게 스트레스를 받고 사느니 차라리 아무 생각도 하지 않는 게 낫겠어요. So that is the end of the intermediate stuff for our lesson. Before we get into all of our advanced notes, but you might come across 느니보다. 느니보다 has the exact same meaning as 느니. More than doing. So rather than doing, it's the same meaning. Whenever you're using 느니, it kind of implies that the first option that comes before is not a good choice. This doesn't have to be that it's a terrible choice, but it's kind of like, If you don't want to say that though, you have another option. 는 것보다. 는 것보다 does not have any of that meaning. Just keep that in mind. If you're wondering what the difference is between 는 것보다 and 느니, it's just that 느니 implies that the first choice is not that good of a choice. And 것보다 has no such meaning. It just means more than A. More than doing A. Now let's go up to the next thing that we need to talk about. 느니 also has the same meaning as we learned as 파에. Now, I'm not going to be talking about this 파에 form. I did a full live stream all about 파. So check that out. In this live stream, I also say the same thing I'm telling you right now, that this 느니 also has the same meaning as 파에, rather than doing something. 오히려, however, can also mean rather or preferably. That means you can use both 오히려 and 차라리 in any of those sentences that we had before, with one exception. 오히려 also can mean contrary to what you thought. On the contrary. You can use 오히려 with 느니 form to mean the same thing as 차라리. 일을 시작하면, when I start work, 바빠질 줄 알았는데. So I thought I would get busy when I started my work. I thought I'd get busy once I start work. 오히려, on the contrary to what I thought, contrary to what you might think, actually, 시간이 더 많아졌어요. I actually got more time. But it means actually as in differently than what I thought. Like actually, I had more time. 일을 시작하면 바빠질 줄 알았는데 I thought I'd get busy once I started work. 오히려, but actually, on the contrary, 시간이 더 많아졌어요. I actually had more time. 일을 시작하면 바빠질 줄 알았는데 오히려 시간이 더 많아졌어요. So then what's the difference between using 차라리 and 오히려 in sentences where either of them can be used? 차라리 is used most of the time when both options are something negative. Both options are bad. As in, if you're choosing the lesser of two evils, as they say, both options are bad. The bed is uncomfortable, the floor is not comfortable, but I would rather, 차라리, rather sleep on the floor. Therefore, 차라리 has kind of a negative feeling to it. You'd rather do that, but actually you don't want either. But if you have to choose, whenever using 오히려, it is different. It's the opposite. This is whenever you're saying the second option is something good. You're not just saying, I'd rather do that. I don't want that either, but I guess I'd rather sleep on the floor. There's another adverb, 도리어, also means on the contrary, or different or opposite than you thought. So it's kind of like 오히려 in that sense, but it's not like 오히려 in the sense that it means rather or preferable. This word 도리어 is actually not used that much. Instead, what you'll hear more often is the shortened form, 되레 or even 되려. 되려 is dialect, but it's also commonly used. So let me give you an example sentence with 도리어. 인삼을 잘못 먹으면, so if you're not careful eating ginseng, or literally if you eat it incorrectly, if you make a mistake eating ginseng, 도리어, contrary to what you might think, different than what you might think, or you might actually harm your health. You might actually harm your health if you're not careful eating ginseng. 인삼을 잘못 먹으면 도리어 건강을 해칠 수 있어요. So that's the difference between 차라리, 오히려, and 도리어. There's one more grammar form we have. This is going to be an action verb stem. Going to write AVS plus 느니, 만, 못하다. So this means that A, whatever comes before here, is worse than, or at least A is not as good as B. A doesn't hold a candle to B. 못하다 does not reach the level of doing verb. So literally you're saying A doesn't reach, cannot do the level of doing B. You're not just saying B is better than A, you're saying specifically that A is worse. A is worse than, or at least A isn't even on the same level as B. So let's do an example of this. 운동을 바른 자세로 하지 않으면, literally, if you do not do exercise with a proper posture, then 운동을 바른 자세로 하지 않으면 안 하느니만 못해요. 안 하느니만 못해요. It cannot match with the level of not doing it. A is worse than B. A is not as good as B. So B, in this case, is not doing it. So you're saying it's worse to do exercise without doing the proper posture than it would be just to not do it. 운동을 바른 자세로 하지 않으면. So if you do not do exercise with proper posture, well then, it's worse than just 안 하느니만 못해요. It's worse than just not doing it. 운동을 바른 자세로 하지 않으면 안 하느니만 못해요. If you don't exercise with proper posture, it would be better to just not exercise. So that is it for this lesson. Go for a little walk. Thanks for coming, everyone.